Hello, everyone. I would like to quickly introduce myself. My name is Emily, and I work for the City Refuge. Today, we will be discussing American Feed and Nutrition. And so, yeah, I want to talk about the HDLs, LDLs, VLDLs because they are important for nutrition and diet. And so, VLDLs are the very low density lipoproteins, and they are made in the liver. They also transport things like triglycerides. And then eventually, as the triglycerides are given off to cells, they kind of shrink and eventually also turn into LDLs. So LDLs are the low density lipoproteins, and they deliver cholesterol to other phospholipids and other phospholipids and triglycerides to cells of all tissues, and they are used for things like energy and also membrane building and making hormones. They are considered what are known as the bad cholesterol. And then the HDLs are the high density lipoproteins, and they are also made in the liver. And they essentially remove the cholesterol from cells and deliver it back then again to the liver for it to be either reused, recycled, or disposed of. And HDLs are also considered kind of the good cholesterol. There are also different types of fats, such as saturated fats, trans fats, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and then you have your omega fatty acids. And you can find these all in the nutrition labels as well. So saturated fats can be found in things like butter or margarine. Trans fats can be found in things like cookies, cake, margarine too, and then donuts. Those would be, the saturated and trans fats would be considered the unhealthy fats that you would rather want to limit. And so there's also the monounsaturated fats, which are, found in things like olive oil, canola, or peanut butter. And they're also the considered healthy fats that you want. So is the polyunsaturated fats, and they can be found in things like grapeseed oil, safflower oil, and corn. And so these are all the mono and polyunsaturated fats are fats you want to incorporate in your diet. Then there's the omega-3 fatty acids, which functions to help with growth and cognitive development. And then there's omega-6, which functions to lower the LDLs, and it also helps with insulin resistance. And these omega fatty acids can be found in things like fish, for example. I also want to talk a little bit about heart disease because it is the top leading cause of death in the US for adults. And so for heart disease, for example, like the HDLs, cholesterol, because of how they work, it actually lowers the risk of heart disease, and it also has anti-inflammatory properties that can also work to help prevent heart attacks, because when an artery clogs up with plaque, they can actually help the plaque from breaking apart and then traveling to other areas, for example, potentially causing a heart attack if they travel to the heart. And so there are also saturated fats, which can raise the LDL cholesterol. And then trans fats from the diet has also shown to have a relation with heart disease, and they can basically change the blood cholesterol pretty much the same as how the saturated fats can do. And so not only though do they raise the LDLs, but they lower also the HDLs, which out of course, all the fats, that may be one of the reasons why they are considered the least healthy. And they also, with these fats, it is you can even eliminate trans fats completely from a diet. So the more that you kind of, not use or not consume products that have these fats, the better chances that your risk for heart disease or other conditions can decrease. So LDLs in the artery, the way that the plaque builds up, it can also cause things like raising blood pressure, hypertension, and then it restricts the blood flow. So that is how kind of the blood pressure increases. And this type of cholesterol is also used as an indicator of, telling whether someone has chances of getting or risk of getting a heart attack or stroke. And so here's a little video that actually talks about kind of the nutrition overall aspects, and then explains a little bit about the LDLs and HDLs and kind of saturated fats as well. And so Dr. Mike, if you've heard of him, he's a popular doctor on social media, a certified family physician, and he speaks with a cardiologist about kind of, asking her questions about specifically not only just kind of fats and saturated fats, but other things like meat. And it's a good overall video of nutrition in general and dietary advice. And so, without further ado, here's the video.
LDL cholesterol as low as possible for cardiovascular risk prevention, so primary prevention versus also secondary prevention. So how do we do that? Well, we want to reduce saturated fat, and a lot of that's in animal products. And in a whole egg, there is saturated fats. If you have high cholesterol, eating multiple eggs a day, adding more saturated fat into your diet, probably not beneficial. But, we just want to lower the overall saturated fat that a patient's eating to help reduce their cholesterol.
Now, the research that we have from elevated LDL scores then matching to outcomes, meaning patients actually getting a heart attack as a first time, getting a secondary heart attack, even losing their lives. Do we feel that those end results are correlated to the LDL scores of people who are eating those saturated food products and living a very unhealthy lifestyle with that?
So starting with what we know even on these metabolic ward studies, the link between saturated fat and raising LDL cholesterol is so well demonstrated. It's been demonstrated in metabolic ward studies for years and years. Like hundreds of studies have shown us that raising your LDL cholesterol by eating saturated fat it's predictable in a linear fashion. It can also help to lower your LDL cholesterol by eating fiber. And the only thing that fiber is in is plants. One of the things that we also have the most robust research for in cardiology history is the predictability of LDL cholesterol being causative in atherosclerosis. So atherosclerosis is when essentially you start to have your vessels start to harden because you have plaque buildup. And actually, all of us start to develop atherosclerosis even when we're young. It's just how bad it builds up while you get older. When people have other risk factors, so things like they're a smoker or they have diabetes or they have high blood pressure, that makes them actually more at risk for cardiovascular disease because the endothelial lining, so the lining of the arteries, ends up becoming weaker and more damaged. And so that LDL cholesterol can really get in there and cause worse plaque.
I see a difference in that if someone can have an LDL of 90 versus if they raise.
All right, I hope that explained a little bit more about and shown you what a visual of some of what can happen in the arteries. And so back to the PowerPoint presentation. All right. So I just briefly want to mention some of the other nutritional diseases and conditions you can have. She mentioned in the video earlier about atherosclerosis, and then there's also things like obesity, which is a very dominant condition and issue in America as well. There's also diabetes type 1 and 2. So type 1 is where the insulin, your body just doesn't produce the insulin you need. And number 2 is when the insulin, there's insulin resistance. So your body doesn't kind of take a lot more insulin because it's like abundance around. And so from diabetes type 2, you can actually manage that through exercise and diet and nutrition therapy as well. There's also mineral deficiencies like scurvy, which is a vitamin C deficiency. There's also hypertension and high blood pressure. And so for obesity, atherosclerosis, and high blood pressure and hypertension, they happen to be related as well. So in terms of different conditions, cardiovascular diseases, and so yeah. I also want to talk a little bit about meats as well. So it is recommended to consume more lean meats than red meats. Lean meats could be like things like chicken and turkey, whereas red meat is more like beef, lamb, and pork. And so there's also white meats that you can eat too that are more healthier. There's also the B12 protein, which your body essentially needs to survive, which if you're doing a vegetarian diet, it can always be supplemented as well. So that's an option. But yeah. I also want to talk a little bit about the diet. So the Mediterranean diet is the best for heart health. And they have things like low saturated and trans fats. They're rich in unsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. And there's also complex carbs and fibers. This type of diet lowers heart disease risks and also decreases inflammations. So what can be found in this type of diet? There are breads, whole grains, pastas, and veggies, especially it's a diet rich in green veggies. And there's different kinds of cheeses, nuts, grapes and figs especially are really good. There's fish, seafood, and little meat. And so they also are high in olive oil and olives, which is a monounsaturated fat. And their main source of that fat comes from nuts and fish. And so it doesn't come from saturated fats, which include like heavy red meat. But they also hardly ever use butter, which is also really high in saturated and trans fats too. But yeah. So overall, a diet with a lot of good vegetables and kind of, you can always eat meat, but maybe a recommendation and suggestion would be to eat more of the lean meats. And then coupled with a lot of fruits and veggies and green vegetables. And limit definitely butter. You see butter a lot in the American diet and such. So there's also the keto diet, which I want to talk a little bit about as well. So if you haven't heard of the keto diet, it's popular and a lot of people use it to lose a lot of weight. But I'm here to say that although it does have good benefits for some people, and then it isn't always necessarily have, best results for others, but mostly, for the most part, it does help with weight loss a lot. This diet though, it is supposed to be like a low carb or no carb diet, and essentially what that does is usually your body would use the carbohydrates to turn that into glucose and what's called as glucogenesis, glucogenesis, and that is energy to be used. But in this diet, what's happening is that instead of using carbs, it is using fats, and it turns into things that are called ketone bodies, in which overall it's not meant, this kind of your body fueling itself on ketone bodies is not meant to be like a long-term solution. It's meant to be if in like survival in the wild or something, you don't have a lot of food or a lot of carbohydrates and such, then your body will switch to that form of energy formations and synthesis. But what can occur is that if your body is on this kind of ketone bodies or relying on that for a longer period of time, you can get what's called as ketoacidosis, which essentially is when there's a lot of ketone bodies around, and it's a negative condition where it can cause kind of, frequent thirsts, and then also nausea and vomiting and stuff like that. So it can also be fatal in rare instances as well. So you definitely want to avoid kind of going on this diet for too long. But for like definitely weight loss, I would say that is beneficial. You just have to keep track and really not overdo it, and be aware of also the risks that come with it, because it is a form of, biochemical fasting in a sense, which, like I said, you don't want to be on it for too long. So, yeah. So now we are going to talk about kind of the American foods and different recipes and such. These are these are some of the things I've noticed in American food, and American food can consist of a lot of different other things, and sometimes other cultural foods that have been Americanized can also occur. And I found that, for example, American food has a lot of fried food. There's also some processed food too, because, store-bought food and such, microwavable ones. And usually that is, I would consider not that healthy, because they are, at least for fried food, they are high in oils that can be unhealthy if used like saturated fats and then trans fats. There's also, in general, in a sense, that there's high sodium and high sugar in American food. I remember from prior research and studies, just from prior classes of knowledge, that we actually there's a recommendation of, how much sodium intake that people, need or are suggested, and you don't want to go over that like limit. But for a lot of foods, it, Americans tend to go over that sodium limit that they don't necessarily need to go over, or they only need a certain amount per day, and a lot of the diet can be high in sodium. It's also high in sugar. Things like big, soda drinks and such, high in sugar is also unhealthy. But it is, sugary donuts, frosting, all that stuff, all the things we love, it's usually high in sugar, or can be. And then the portion sizes compared to other countries are really big. For example, I remember, going to abroad, studying abroad, and other countries like, in Europe, compared to America, like, I would go into different restaurants and such, and their meal portion is kind of a lot, well, it is a lot smaller, and I just remember saying, like, I was surprised about how much of a difference it is, and I'm not, like, kind of used to having the portion sizes that were smaller, a lot smaller, and so I feel like that has contributed to a lot of, for example, other conditions necessarily, because we do have the portion size does also matter in terms of how much food you're eating in one sitting or one meal. And, that is just a part of, I guess, food culture here in America. It is, you want the biggest portion, the best, as much food as you can get, for the money that is worth and such. So I've also noticed really popularity in fast food over time. And a lot of kids kind of in general, or people in general, more so love like Chick-fil-A and McDonald's and other things, and the fast food isn't generally considered healthy. So that can also contribute to obesity and other conditions and factors for nutrition. And so there's other cultural Americanized food, which, for example, here we have China Star, and a lot of the food that, although it is really good and it's one of the top kind of foods or Americanized foods and such, is really popular. It is also not like traditional Chinese food. It's more, fitted to, I guess, our tastes, in a sense that, it's kind of altered or has been altered, and it's different from the actual traditional Chinese. And so there's also another example that I remember for, like, when take the fettuccine alfredo. So usually I found that, it is popular item here, but in actual Italy or other countries, they don't usually do, fettuccine alfredo, in a sense, because it's more of an American kind of food that is found. It's supposed to be, pasta and Italian, or like things like that, but it was, not really found in actual Italy. It's not something that they also are, well versed in cooking as well. And so those are just a few examples. And then here's also another site that lists the kind of a top kind of list of the most American foods. And on that list is meatloaf. It's classic dinner entree. And so there's also things like sandwiches, the Reuben, which is really popular. There's also pizza, and it maybe originally from Italy and Italian food, but the deep dish pizza from Chicago, which is really popular. It's all American, and usually deep dish pizza Chicago is most famous for. I have not known other places in the Midwest or other places to have deep dish pizza, or is really popular in other areas but Chicago. So there's that. There's also the Philly cheesesteak, and then waffles, things like corn dogs is super popular in things like festivals and different holidays. and in general, and you can find those in school lunches as well. S'mores is also another American tradition, and you know, it's best to be on a fire or campground. And then there's things like tater tots, breakfast foods, biscuits, and then of course Tex-Mex tacos. What let's see, cheese curds. Yes, they're really good in the Midwest. They're really popular here. So there's also American version of Chinese food, which is what I mentioned earlier. You wouldn't find this kind of food in traditional Chinese cuisine. So it's very Americanized. Definitely high in sodium, sugar, those salts and such. And then there are also lobster rolls, summer favorites. Chili cheese dogs, very popular. You can find them everywhere and is really great. Banana splits are one of the favorite desserts. Grilled cheese, we've seen that, and then ribs as well, very popular for barbecues and outdoor food cooking. French fries are one of them. Let's see. And yeah, so these are some of the top Americanized or really American foods that you have. And so back to the presentation. And so yeah, these are just some of the examples of the top American foods you can find. And then there's also popular breakfast foods, which contain things like cereals, omelets, pancakes, sausages, the good old scrambled eggs, sausages, and bacon. Really popular. And then there's things like cheese grits and such. There's also coffee, of course. And there's different pancake recipes, Starbucks coffee. I like the French toast cake recipe by Aiden, and he's another popular influencer cook, and he will show us how to make a funfetti toast. So, going on to his social media page, you can find, and this is just one example of a resource of recipes and such. It's a fun way of, doing food. And some of these recipes are creative and fun.
Today I'm showing you how to make funfetti French toast. Start off by cracking in 3 eggs, a cup of heavy cream, half a cup of whole milk, brown sugar, vanilla extract, pinch of salt, a lot of sprinkles. Whisk that up. Grab our challah, slice this into about 1-inch thick slices, and we're just going to dip it in here straight into our pan. After 2 to 3 minutes, give them a flip. Quick funfetti glaze time. Powdered sugar, vanilla extract, whole milk. Whisk that up, sprinkles, drizzle. Oh my god.
And there you go. There's also other recipes you can do, which can be, here's a pancake recipe that I found as well. It's just a good way of doing a traditional style or homemade pancake. It's easy to make, so here is the pancake video. And so, yeah.
Everything's working correctly.
All set, thanks. It's so easy, I realized I could tackle any project.
Alright, getting through this ad.
Good old-fashioned pancakes. This is a great recipe that All Recipes member Dakota Kelly found in her grandma's recipe book. Kelly wrote, "Judging from the weathered look of this recipe card, this was a family favorite." Let's start by sifting 1½ cups of all-purpose flour through a mesh strainer, along with 3½ teaspoons of baking powder, a teaspoon of salt, and a tablespoon of white sugar. Next, make a well in the center of the dry ingredients and pour in 1¼ cups of milk, 1 egg, and 3 tablespoons of melted butter. Mix all the ingredients until you form a smooth batter. Now, heat up and lightly oil a griddle or a frying pan over medium-high heat. I'm using butter to enhance that old-fashioned flavor. Pour the batter onto the griddle using approximately 1/4 cup for each pancake. Brown them on both sides. I look for 2 things to know when to flip. You want to see lots of tiny bubbles appearing in the center of the pancake, and look for nice browning around the edges. Now serve them hot off the griddle.
All right. So, that was just a little fun recipe how to make a traditional pancake, and something you can, a lot of people do to make for breakfast. But yeah. And then moving on, we have the okay, the PowerPoint closed off, but here we are back again. Yeah, sorry about that. It closed off. It wasn't working or responding, really, the application. So, moving on, we can continue to do different popular holiday foods. So these are different kind of images of foods you'd find traditionally or most commonly in different holidays. For example, Thanksgiving, you'd find a lot of the turkey dinner, and on like the top right corner, and so stuff like cranberry sauce is really popular. Not only the turkey, but like stuffed turkey. You can do different vegetables and also different desserts, funnel cakes and such. Even different kinds of breads and such as well. And then there's also, for Christmas holidays, eggnogs are popular, and that's the picture in the center. And so also things like, let's see what you find Christmas meal, mac and cheese, different green beans, just in general, overall, traditional holiday kind of, setting and stuff. And so there's also Halloween, which essentially is, of course, I love candy and sugar that Halloween Day. And then 4th of July is also a very fun holiday where you see a lot of barbecues and grills and things like hot dogs and, any kebabs, corns, anything basically on a grill. And different kind of meats and such is also very popular 4th of July food. And so, yeah. There's also other popular foods like mac and cheese, pizza. And here's a pizza recipe from, again, Aiden. And then meatloaf, and there's also dairy too, ice cream and whatnot. And so, yeah. Here are some of the recommendations as well. And on the left-hand side, there's recommendations for restaurants in Colombia that I think that has or exemplifies a lot of what a traditional American food or diet looks like. There's First Watch, which is really great for breakfast foods. And then there's also China Star, which I've talked earlier about, American Chinese. And then Heidelberg's, they have a lot of burgers and fried food. There's also Flat Branch, Murray's, and Broadway Diner. And so here are some other resources as well. There's food website guidelines, dietary guidelines. This is the Aiden's website for all his food and recipes and videos. There's also FDA nutrition label here. You also have saturated fats and American Heart Association. And here are all my sources in APA format. And so, yeah. That is the end of my presentation. So, thank you for listening, and I hope you have been able to learn something, and hopefully you can be able to make some of these recipes that I've shown you. Happy cooking, and definitely, I encourage a healthy diet, and if you can definitely, keep with any of the important vegetables and important kind of monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, and have a high diet in omega-3s and such, and follow your guidelines. Hopefully be able to reduce sodium and sugar in your diet also really helps with health and staying healthy. So yeah, thank you so much. Goodbye.